to welcome you all, and I appreciate you joining us for today's Park Pride Roundtable. Our topic today is Beyond Parks, Pushing Past Park Boundaries to Make Atlanta a More Livable City. If we'll go on to the next slide, I do want to give you an idea of what to expect here today. In a moment, I will be turning it over to Maria Saporta, who will introduce our panel. From there, we'll go into a moderated Q&A discussion where Maria, as she does best, will ask a series of probing questions to get us started. From there, we're going to go into 3 different breakout sessions. So you have the choice of joining a conversation on parks and affordable housing, parks and regionalism, and parks and active transportation. So we'll get a chance for you to kind of immerse yourself in the topic and to share your thoughts and maybe ask a question of our subject matter experts. From there, we'll come back and our breakout facilitators will provide a brief what we heard in our different breakouts. And from there, we'll go into audience Q&A. I will mention that today's main session is being recorded and will be shared through email in about 24 hours. The breakout sessions will not be recorded. So you have that to keep in mind. We will also, when we send this, the recording out to folks, there's a short satisfaction survey we'd encourage you to complete. It'll give us an idea of whether or not we hit the mark or not. I'd also encourage you to share this session if there's folks who you think might benefit beyond the folks that we have here today. Next slide. I do want to recognize all of our corporate champions. These are the folks that support programs such as this and the work that we do day in and day out to advance our mission to engage communities to activate the power of parks. Those groups include the Home Depot Foundation, Georgia Pacific, Georgia Power, Kaiser Permanente, and a whole range of different partners, large and small, who recognize the importance of local parks where people live. Thank you to all of our sponsors for making this work possible. Next slide. For those that are not under a rock, we do have an election season going on, and I do want to recognize that Park Pride has been working with a series of partners to engage and educate the mayoral candidates. This included a big event that we did last month of a mayoral forum on greenspace. We also have created a resource page that includes brief 11-minute videos of each of the different mayoral candidates, including those that weren't able to make it in person or make it to the actual forum that we did. So I would encourage you to get informed on the candidates that are out there and their views on issues of parks and green space and all the related issues. Get informed on the candidates. Early voting is now underway and the election is just 2 weeks away from today. So I'd encourage you all to get out there and vote as your city and region depend on it, because truly the decisions we will be making at the ballot box on November 2nd will have far-reaching implications for the next 4 years and beyond. Next slide. I also want to call attention to our Parks and Green Space Conference. Earlier this year, we celebrated our 20th anniversary Parks and Green Space Conference. Preparations are now underway for our 21st Parks and Green Space Conference. We have a date, March 28th, 2022. And we also have a location. We are going to be returning to the Botanical Garden, which I am very excited about. Last year, the theme was the new case for parks. Next year, the theme is an emphatic, the parks we need now. I also will mention that our call for presentations is now live. So for those that are interested in contributing to the program, see the link in the chat to learn more. But above all, please save the date for March 28th and join us in person at the Botanical Gardens as we address the important topic of the parks we need now. Next slide. Let me say a word about engagement in today's roundtable. Throughout today's program, I'll encourage you to make use of the chat function. We'll be mining questions all throughout the program to share with Maria that she'll be drawing from in the latter portions of the program. You can also use the chat function to engage with a larger audience, and this becomes a place to share comments beyond your chances to engage in the breakout sessions. We encourage you to do that. I will mention that if you want your questions to be addressed, we will do our best to try to address those questions we have in the time we have. Questions do come with question marks, so I'd make sure if you want to raise a question to present it in the form of a question. And while we're here, for those of us that have joined us, I see the numbers continue to climb on participants. Please tell us who you are and your affiliation. We're glad that you're spending a little bit of time with us, and look forward to today's conversation. Next slide. So this brings me to our topic today. Again, our topic is Beyond Parks, Pushing Past Park Boundaries to Make Atlanta a More Livable City. I will share that as we think about the session here today, just to bear in mind that we see parks as places of connection. They're an important part of an urban environment, and just as they surround neighborhoods that make up a city, they must be part of a conversation considering a broader set of issues faced by communities. So in order to make Atlanta a more livable city, it's imperative that we push past park boundaries to start thinking of parks more holistically. And I can think of no one better to lead us in this conversation than Maria Saporta. A little bit about Maria. She is an Atlanta native. She's daughter of European parents who were active citizens in Atlanta. She's the mother of 2 children who also make Atlanta their home. Maria is a longtime Atlanta business and civic journalist who spent 27 years with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution as its business and civic columnist. She founded SaportaReport.com in 2009 to provide daily updates on local business, urban, and civic issues, focusing on Metro Atlanta, Georgia, and beyond. Maria also provided columns and news stories for the Atlanta Business Chronicle, WABE, Atlanta Magazine, among others. In 2017, Saporta Report received an award for outstanding public outreach and journalism from the Georgia chapter of the American Planning Association. Maria was given the inaugural Atlanta Hero Award by the Atlanta Rotary of Atlanta, July 9th, 2018. Most recently, in 2019, she was inducted to the Georgia Trend Hall of Fame. I also will mention that we have a monthly column in Saporta Report, and I have found that it is an important part of democracy in Atlanta to know what's going on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maria, who's going to lead us in this conversation. Maria.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I didn't expect such a a glowing kind of resume of what I've done, but as y'all probably know if you've read Saporta Report, this is an issue near and dear to my heart, and I think that we have just an amazing panel of folks who contribute to our urban experience in the Atlanta region. And I'd like to quickly introduce everyone, and the first question that I'll have for y'all will actually give them an opportunity to further expand on their points of view on this really important topic. I'm going to start Lisa Gordon. Lisa Gordon runs Atlanta Habitat for Humanity, has had amazing success there, and has, ventured Atlanta Habitat into new areas, actually in the area of creating community, as well as individual houses, and exploring the multifamily area. But before that, Lisa has been part of the Atlanta Beltline, worked in our city and our community and our region, and has had a really broad view of what makes a community a healthy place to live. Next on my list is Doug Hooker. Doug Hooker, I first got to know Doug Hooker when he was Commissioner of Public Works for the City of Atlanta under Bill Campbell, and their stories there, but we won't go into those. An engineer by training, I think your first job was at Georgia Power. Has been with the Atlanta Regional Commission as its top executive for the better part of the past decade, and sadly has announced his decision to retire on his birthday, March 30th. What's your birthday? I want to make sure everybody sends you a nice birthday card.
31st.
31st. Okay, I knew it was at the end of March. Anyway, for all of y'all who have the pleasure to know Doug, he has, long before he joined ARC, he was very much involved with the Regional Leadership Forum and trying to actually build the whole idea of a regional mindset for our community. And certainly, and we've already gotten to know Michael Halicki. For those of you who want his full bio, talk to me afterwards. But, you know, Michael has had a history in public relations, nonprofit South Face, and has been doing an amazing job with Park Pride and looking at parks from the broader viewpoint, and great leadership to the organization. And then Rebecca Serna. I think I can't remember the first time we met, but when you became head of the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, I said, oh, what a perfect combination that is. And Rebecca has been working really hard to try and get Atlanta to be more accommodating to alternative modes of transportation, starting out primarily with bicycles, but recently through a merger with PEDS, the Pedestrian Advocacy Organization. Atlanta Bicycle Coalition has been broadening its purview and may soon change its name. So that's a whole to reflect its broader mission. So that's our panel. Great panel to lead this discussion. And I'm going to start with a question for everyone, and we can go in the order in which I introduced y'all. The question for on a personal level, how do parks and green space relate to your focus, to the focus of your life and your work? So this is both a personal and a work-related question. Lisa, to you first.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Maria. I'm honored to be on this panel with so many great friends. Parks has meant to me, first of all, I guess I'm Lisa Gordon. I'm the president and CEO of Atlanta Habitat for Humanity, where our goal is to make sure everyone has a safe, decent place to live. We've done that recently since I joined Habitat in 2015 by focusing on families and revitalizing our neighborhoods so that people can enjoy them. I think as it relates to parks, we think that's integral to our work, and we have some great projects I hope to share with you later that exemplify that. As far as parks go, fun facts, I worked in parks very early in my career in Broward County. I was part of a team that developed metrics and improved our parks until it won National Park of the Year. I've also worked in city government on some really large park projects. I'm a former member of the Park Pride Board, and I was part of the team that did the implementation plan for parks. And when I was at the Atlanta Beltline and opened the skate park and DH Stanton Park and some of the local community parks and green space. And I just think I would call myself a patron of the parks. I love parks.
So Lisa, let me pin you down a little bit. When you want to go to a park, do you have a favorite park that you like to go to? And is there a place that really speaks to you from where you want to either commune with nature or, you know, enjoy the green space in Atlanta or Metro Atlanta, I'll say?
I think since I worked on the Beltline, I like going to the Beltline parks. I will be honest, I'm on the trails a lot, and if you frequent Ponce City Market, you probably will see me there because I go there regularly. But also I like some of the nature trails that are out in different communities. And so I have some friends that are park folks, and so sometimes we'll visit them. And I was recently in Chicago last week, and I got a chance to go to Millennial Park. So I got there a day early, and that was one of my things, was to go check out the park. So those are some of my favorites.
Great, thank you. All right, so next is our friend Doug Hooker, and talk about how parks play a role both for you professionally and personally.
Thank you, Maria. And I will also say thanks to Michael and the Park Pride team for inviting me to be part of the panel and the event today. You know, from the Atlanta Regional Commission's perspective, our view is how do we make systems work together in order to make communities thrive? And there's certainly parks, green space, and blueways are incredibly important parts of making communities feel complete and thrive, and having people have access to those kinds of spaces, ready access to those kind of spaces is an important part of what we look at. In fact, we have a planner whose principal workload is to look at parks and trails and green spaces, and again, blueways. We have tried systematically over the last few years, over the last several years actually, to get regional elected leaders to pay more attention to growing and connecting our green space and our trails. It's specific. We developed a regional trail plan about 5 years ago that showed how it's possible for us over the course of the next decade with sufficient financial resources to connect all the trails that are in different parts of the region together so that we have a truly integrated and connected trail system, which would make access to the parks also much more easily and accessible. So that's been an important thing. Our two major initiatives that we had in regard to trails, green spaces, and also blueways, because we kind of connect them together where there are major creeks or bodies of water connect together, are the Chattahoochee Riverlands project that we did jointly with Trust for Public Land, the City of Atlanta and Cobb County, which envisions a 100-mile long trail system from the top of the river in the region to the bottom of the river inside the region in Coweta. Of course, the river flows beyond that, but at least with regards to the river. There will be a series of trails, parks, historical markers, and important environmental reflection points. And then again, the other effort that's much more quiet, hasn't gotten the attention, that I think actually has a greater potential for the region long term, is the Finding the Flint project that we have partnered with Hannah Palmer with to try to help promote the idea of rediscovering the Flint River and re-energizing and re-nourishing and replenishing the headwaters of the Flint River and return them to a more natural state as they emerge from the under the airport runway. So there's a lot of things that we think about with regard to parks. And personally, for me, you know, I have to say, parks haven't been as big a part of my life as they probably should have been until the pandemic. And then here recently, my wife and I are at parks, I won't say every weekend, but definitely several times a month, much more so than we were pre-pandemic. And that's a good thing. I have found them a great natural, healthy outlet for us to just get out and get away from the four walls of the house. So it's been mentally stimulating. I have personally tried to be invested from a community standpoint in parks through my work with the Georgia Conservancy early years ago, which is where I first met Michael Halicki. And then also as a member of the Trust for Public Land Board briefly, and the Piedmont Park Conservancy Board. So have always had a civic interest as well as professional work relationship to parks and trails.
So when you and Patrice go out, which park do you go to? Which green space?
Cascade Nature Reserve. And you know, the irony is we lived for years on a street where the Cascade Nature Preserve is at the very end of the street called Beltry Circle. And we rarely went there when we were, I guess we were just too busy being you know, adults that we didn't pay attention to that. And it wasn't until the pandemic set in that we said, you know, this is a great space. We just need to go visit it. And after revisiting it, we said, we need to do this a lot more often. We just compelled to do so. And we've done that. That's our favorite park or nature trail to go to. And the thing I like about it, it reminds me a lot of the parks that I grew up with in Cincinnati, where I was as a child. Cincinnati has a great park system, and it has some parks that are people parks, but it has a lot of large parks that are nature parks with very little people intrusion. And those are the parks that were my favorite ones when I was growing up. And the Cascade Nature Reserve reminds me of that. It's a bit of nostalgia for me. Takes me home to those parks that are more for nature and less for people. So, yeah.
Patrice just peeked in at the door.
Yeah, she just peeked in because I realized I was on the phone. I saw her.
All right. So, Rebecca, let's hear from you and how parks relate to the work that you do at the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, and as well what they mean to you personally.
Yeah, I'll start with the personal. I really feel kind of grounded by the parks around me in my community. We live in Southeast Atlanta in Kirkwood, And I was realizing and thinking about this question, I really think about the neighborhood in terms of the parks and where they're located relative to me. I have young children, so that's a big part of it. It's all about how can we get the kids out of the house, expend some energy, wear them out a little bit so that the rest of the day can go more smoothly. And I found that parks are really key to that. We live pretty close to Bessie Branham Park, so we bike there at least once a week. It's really become just a part of our routine. And then we're fortunate to have my family here in Atlanta. Some of you might know my dad, Al Buckmaster. He has what he calls the 4 parks ride. And so this is if we really need to wear the kids out, he takes them to 4 different parks on their bikes. He's got a great bike-friendly route. And so I really connect with Park Pride's goals around access to parks and people in neighborhoods being able to walk or bike to a great park in their community. When we were looking for a house, we lived in the West End for about 10 years, or Beecher Hills, just outside the West End. We used to go to Cascade Springs all the time. And I just felt like I was in the forest and in the city at the same time. And it was a beautiful feeling. I love that, especially when there's a creek thrown into the mix. So that's like my perfect park too, for the solitude and tranquility. And then there's also some very cool things that I think people do to activate the park, especially around the entrances. And you always see people picnicking, or maybe there's a group of school kids doing nature education. So there's just really everything in that one place. And I love that. And then connecting to the work that we do at the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. And I see there's some folks from PEDS that are here in the call today. It's just really key to have streets that allow us to access our parks safely and easily. There's a lot of focus in the transportation world on the commute trip, getting people to and from work, getting to jobs. And that's really important. It's essential, especially when it comes to transit, big part of that work. However, most people's trips on a daily basis are not the work trip. And particularly now with COVID, a lot of folks, not everyone, but a lot of folks don't have that commute anymore. And so I think it's opened up everyone's eyes to the importance of how do we get to other places in our daily lives? How can we make that less stressful, safer, and even something that's a positive and additive? So, how can you get that accidental exercise? I say that's the only kind I like to get, is just purely accidental exercise, getting to or from somewhere. Working that into our days for more people can make us healthier as a society. And I think it also helps us connect to each other better. If you're walking to the store or biking and you see a neighbor, you can easily stop to talk with them and find out what's going on in their lives. And that's a lot harder to do when you're inside of a car. So that's something that we think about. And we have a really exciting thing that's happening right now with our Atlanta Streets Alive initiative that brings a lot of these pieces together. Parks, this is more of a passive park concept where you take a street that's normally full of congestion and traffic and noisy cars. And for the afternoon, at least, you turn it over to people to use however they see fit. They might be biking or walking or rollerblading or one-wheeling or pushing a stroller, riding a skateboard, or they might just be visiting a local business and getting that opportunity to just sit somewhere and watch people and experience the city differently. So we have legislation right now that would make Atlanta Streets Alive happen every Sunday afternoon on Peachtree Street. We're really excited to talk more about that.
Yeah, you anticipated one of our questions coming to you in a little bit, and we'll get there. And I just want to say, I live 2 blocks from Piedmont Park, which is fabulous. But I also saw Marty mention the Herbert Taylor Nature Preserve, which is just a wonderful little gem. One of the really exciting things about the Atlanta region is all the hidden places that we have that we can access that unfortunately not everybody knows about. And I wanted to ask y'all, and Doug, you brought this up, and I'll start with you first on this one, how COVID-19 changed the way we look at parks and our whole lifestyle, work style. Can you talk about how it has impacted you and your work, the COVID pandemic?
So I would say definitely yes. I don't know anybody who hasn't been impacted both personally and professionally by the pandemic. But as it regards the pandemic and me and parks, hold on 1 minute.
Hi, Patrice.
Sorry, everybody.
It makes us human. That's one way that our lives have changed, right?
Definitely, definitely. And I'm sure there's several people out there in the audience that know my wife, so they probably got a kick out of seeing her. Anyway, what I was saying is one of the things that I observed and believed that was occurring across the region, although I don't necessarily have the data to back it up, is that when people were getting out to parks and green spaces more during the pandemic, as all of us were, I'm sure, we were beginning to explore green spaces and parks that were less familiar, going to different parts of the region. I can tell you from personal observation that the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, which used to have very few people who you didn't already know from around the community, during the pandemic, there are license plates from all over the region that have shown up at that nature preserve, which is a good thing. People from different parts of the city, different parts of the region were discovering a new park that they'd never heard about, or they may have heard a friend say something about, and they were going to find out about it themselves. And likewise, many of us, and I can say the same thing myself, I've visited some other different parks during the pandemic myself. I think for many of us, parks have taken on a regional thing beyond our local parks by virtue of our having the time and the desire to explore something new and still getting out in nature and relaxing. And so I think many Atlantans, and by Atlantans I mean regional residents, not just city of, have taken advantage of the pandemic experience as a part of restoring their own mental, emotional health, and wanting to experience different aspects of nature, getting out to different parks, state and local parks around the region that they probably hadn't visited before.
Great. And okay, Lisa, I'm going to jump to you on this question. And this is, how has the pandemic affected your work and your life?
Okay, here we go. As far as work and life, I think we've had to do a huge pivot. Most of you know that Habitat builds with volunteers. We are outdoors every Saturday. We have a lot of engagement with people. And since the pandemic, we've had to have virtual engagement, and the outdoor activities have been limited. We've brought back volunteers recently, up to 25 people that are masked. We're asking for people to be vaccinated so we can be safer, but it's had a huge impact on that. I think the other thing that's happened is the crisis around affordability in neighborhoods, and green space has really been amplified. And for us, we have a waiting list of over 320 people right now. And we had to reduce our production because we were doing it with less volunteers. And then, there were lots of changes, supply change of sponsors. And so we've really had to pivot some. But I think it's really important for people to have outlets. So some of the things we did do in like our newsletters to homeowners is identify what they can do outdoors with the kids. I think with kids and families, like Doug alluded to, you just, had some cabin fever from being in the house all the time and working, and just finding resources in your community. And I think the parks, and certainly the nature preserve, I just think the less activity that's in it, the more calming and peaceful it is to me. Those are some of the things that we saw with COVID. And I think it also amplified the maintenance that's needed at parks. Because when you go to these places, you start saying, oh, wow, this should be done, that should be done. And maybe before, when we would talk about the budgets or what's happening, you didn't really associate it with this in the same way. So I think to me, it amplified the need for housing, it amplified the need for parks, and for the maintenance of those things in our community, and for access and opportunity to everyone.
Yeah, I would quickly, Maria, just reinforce what Lisa has so wisely said, especially the maintenance issue. Because same thing, my wife and I walk in Cascade Nature Reserve now a lot more frequent. It's like, well, they need to do this, or this needs to be done. And we have picked up trash too, where people are careless in the park system. You would think that people be more conscientious about taking care of the parks, but they can be just as careless with the parks as they are with the public right of way. And so we've had many a time when we go walking, we're picking up trash that people have just dumped by the side of the trail, which is really unfortunate. But unfortunately, we have too many people think like that. Sorry for interrupting, but I want to amplify Lisa's point there.
No, no, that was totally welcomed, and it's in Zoom world. Sometimes it's hard to have this back and forth, great communications, but we can try on this end. So if anytime one of the panelists wants to jump in and do what Doug just did, you're welcome to do it. And Rebecca, I wanted to ask, how did COVID change your life, your work?
Sure. It's had similar impact to a lot of other folks with the addition of having kids in school. And fortunately, my husband works from home too. So we've been able to trade off on the, I won't call it homeschooling. It's monitoring how often they get distracted by YouTube part of their schooling. But from the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition perspective, we did have to go some pretty major changes. We realized early in the pandemic that going back and forth to the office with the changing tides was not going to work for us. And so we decided to become a fully remote workplace and just learn how to raise our voices when a truck goes by that's very loud. And I think that's worked really well for our team because we do try to use sustainable transportation and types of mobility to get places. It really frees us up to be working from that home base. And then if we need to go somewhere in person, we have more options for those sustainable modes. And then from a programming standpoint, like a lot of other organizations have done and talked about, we took a lot of our programming virtual. And it's had some unexpected benefits. We've been able to connect with more people doing virtual bike education, for example, which doesn't seem intuitive that you could do that virtually. But we've, especially with the opportunity post vaccinations being available, to have some kind of a hybrid model. We can do the talking part virtually, and then when it's time to get on the bike, we can get people together and do that safely and in a spread out fashion. And even our bike family program, which connects families, kids and their guardians or parents who are in need of a bike. Maybe there's one bike in the family, but other family members don't have one. We've been able to continue and really deepen that program through COVID, which was in direct reaction to what we were hearing from people who said, hey, I need to find a way to stay active and have the mental relief and peace that comes from having my body be physically active during this time. And so I think that's been a great lesson, just to try to figure out how we can reach more people by combining the virtual and the in-person spaces. And then on the advocacy front, similarly, with all of the city meetings moving to this online format, we've actually seen greater participation from folks who don't have to then travel to City Hall in order to have their voices heard and weigh in on an issue. They can, place a phone call. And that's increased the number of people getting involved with advocacy initiatives.
So we've got about less than 10 minutes before we go to the breakouts, but I wanted to ask questions to y'all individually. Doug, you talked about the regional trail network and parks having a regional look at what blueways and greenways can do for our region. Can you talk about what a healthy Metro Atlanta would look like from a blueways and greenways point of view?
I think a healthy Atlanta would look like children could see nature in the places where nature is intended to be. So many of our creeks and rivers are unfortunately been so intruded on by human presence that the natural elements, the birds, the amphibians, the reptiles that would naturally live in those places are missing from the ecosystems. And so if we can pay attention, part of the idea of bringing people closer to rivers and creeks through the trail and river and blueways network is to get them to appreciate the amenity that nature provides for us that we have often in the past overlooked or trampled upon. and to begin to appreciate it again and be a part of supporting, restoring it and maintaining it in a healthy balance so that we can appreciate it up close and not just have to look at it through the lens of a TV or visiting some special carved out ecosystem place. We have those places right here available to us, and we're lacking the opportunity, or we've been lacking the will, the political will, to really make those a part of our everyday experience. So that's one thing, and I'm probably getting a little preachy here, and I apologize for that.
But greenways and blueways are ways to make they don't look at the governmental lines; they continue.
That's exactly right.
And so they can play a role to help knit together our region and maybe help break down the fractionalization that we see around us.
And if we want to make them real and really connected, we have to think in multi-jurisdictional terms. We have to think without political boundaries about how to provide these, people call them amenities. I'm calling them more and more essential elements of community and less amenity as though it's something extra and nice. It's something critically important. And if there's nothing else the pandemic taught us, it taught us how critically important and vital these places are for the balance of the human experience, right? And so we have to find the resources and the ways and keep up the effort to make these multi-jurisdictional places that aren't political, that respect no political boundaries, that allow us to flow across otherwise political boundaries and understand we are a community, one with the other, north, south, east, and west. So again, I'm getting preachy. I apologize for that.
No, we like you to preach, and you're getting to a point in your life where you can preach and say things that you probably had to be quiet about before. Lisa, one of the issues, and it's a conundrum, you create great parks, and that the community around the parks become far more desirable. And then all of a sudden it becomes a challenge to not only keep the existing residents, but to be able to have people of all different income levels be able to live in a healthy community with parks and green space. What can be done?
Well, I've had to work on this issue for a lot of my career, and I think there are solutions. The good news is there are solutions. One is, first, we have to have land. We have to take back some of the land. And there's lots of places that are abandoned now or vacant, and there's an opportunity to recover those lands. And as development occurs, have land for affordable housing and have land for parks. And you can also integrate those things together. I think for residents that have been in the existing neighborhoods, we have to look at ways of adding value to them so that they can stay. So for an example, Habitat has a program where we do critical repairs up to $20,000 per homeowner, so that those families that own their home, that have lived in the community where we're building, they can actually stay in their homes. Because if your roof is leaking, the windows and doors have air coming through, the yard or the paint, all of those things cost money. And most of our seniors and veterans, for example, that are the really anchor tenants in those communities, they are making tough decisions about limited resources that they have. So I think programs have to look at, if we want to make this community better, we're making it better for the people that live here and the people who might want to live here in the future and the people that are going to visit here. To Doug's point earlier, when people come from all around the region to visit your park, they're coming to your community because they're part of your community. That we are all connected, and so I think we definitely have to start with securing the land because many projects have included a huge public investment, but the investment hasn't been also around different housing types at different incomes. So if you leave it to market forces, the market forces to make their performance work, to make their investors happy, they have to be on the higher end of the housing continuum. And if it's any kind of amenity that doesn't exist anywhere else in the region, then you're going to end up with luxury housing, not even just normal housing. You're going to end up really on the top end because you can't get it everywhere. So I think it requires intentionality and funding and land.
So we're got the clock ticking, and Rebecca, I wanted you teased to it. Atlanta Streets Alive. making a weekly event. And this, tell us what that would do to our community and help change our quality of life. And you came by this honestly by going to being in Colombia and seeing how all of that. Talk to us about that. Was it? Tell us about your experience and what that can do, and if we can be short, too.
Sure. Yeah, I won't belabor what Atlanta Streets Alive is or does, because I imagine a lot of you have been to it and experienced it for yourselves. And if you haven't, there's a lot of videos online of people enjoying open streets in Atlanta. We've been doing this since 2010. And really the key for me is it's a way to jumpstart these conversations. And people, I think, learn and change their minds best based on experiences. We can say that everyone should shift to sustainable transportation, but it's kind of hard to picture that if you're driving everywhere because of the way Atlanta's been built for so long. And growing up here, that was certainly my experience with Atlanta. So what Atlanta Streets Alive does is it really gives people the opportunity to experience that for themselves. Don't take my word for it. Get out and be an active participant in an open street environment where you don't feel terrified to let your kids ride a bike or to walk across the street because of speeding cars. And so it just helps us reimagine what streets can be like, while at the same time providing a really practical outlet for these sustainable transportation modes. And Peachtree Street in particular, with it being our signature street, it's relatively flat. It's kind of the spinal cord from Southwest Atlanta through downtown and up to Midtown and beyond. There's a lot more of a people-centered environment, built environment already along Peachtree Street, so the storefronts are closer to the street. And there's also alternative one-way streets, as well as the MARTA line running underneath the street. So it really creates almost a very complete environment for transportation modes. And we think that having this on a weekly basis, as well, is going to give people the opportunity to build it into their lives and start to form this as more of a habit, as opposed to a special event, more of a festival feel. It'll be something that you can just experience on a Sunday as you're going somewhere else. And we know that Atlanta has so many great things to offer. So this will hopefully become really just part of the fabric of our lives.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Now I'd like to shift it back to our friend Michael Halicki, who's going to tell us all about the breakout rooms.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Great group, great conversation. We started out talking about how do we develop housing along with parks and keep it affordable. And Lisa came back with a comment of intentionality. We need to make sure that the development of green space, of transportation, all happens with each development as it gets planned out. She used the example of one of Habitat's developments right now that is using stormwater infrastructure as an opportunity to develop new park space for that neighborhood. A question was also asked if there was any legislation or policy on the books right now that really combined the two or supported the two being co-developed, and there was none that we could think of in the group. And if we could identify some later, that would be great. Deborah asked a question about how we deal with parks and crime that happens in parks. And Michael and Lee really talked about being able to have eyes on the park, to activate the space, to make sure that that there's a sufficient budget to make sure that the park is kept up, but also the concept of community pride, engagement, and again, activation came up. It can't be a crime-ridden area if there's things going on at the park, if there are eyes at the park and people utilizing the space effectively. When we got to the second question, there was really one collective answer to what to engage the potential next mayor for or with around parks and affordable housing, and it was really a coalition-built solution. It's that different disciplines should align around the same message when it comes to parks and affordable housing development. And I imagine that goes the same with transportation and other critical civil infrastructure parts of this. And so what that meant was, affordable housing advocates need to be there advocating for parks, and vice versa. As we advocate for green space and parks, we should be advocating for affordable housing being developed in coordination with that. So those were the major topics that came out of the affordable housing breakout session.
Excellent. And next, we'd love to hear from Crystal Jackson from Atlanta Regional Commission about parks and regionalism. Crystal.
Thanks, Michael. We had an excellent discussion around parks and regionalism. One thing that really came to the front fairly quickly is how do we better work across jurisdictions? And it was suggested that first we need a cohesive vision, and then begin to make personal connections on whatever that vision is. And then establish regular meetings, whether it's quarterly or monthly, to keep the momentum going and keep relationships going. And this was really stated in the context of the Chattahoochee Riverlands process that has been going on. It is an implementation phase, but it's a great model for other organizations and coalitions that are working together on parks across the region. We had another point that was made that there's no central coordination point and that we need a broader vision for everyone in the region around parks and the urban forest and green space. And to really make that our brand. We do know that, Atlanta is called the city in the forest. Maybe we need to rebrand as the region in the forest and begin to work around and build around this amenity that are our trees and green space and our parks. Because oftentimes there's conversations and efforts going on that may be focused on the same area, but are conflicting in nature. And then the last point that was made around the kind of working across boundaries is that only in the context of a regional plan can we ensure that equity and sustainability are made, especially in the communities that are maybe under-resourced and need to be sure that they have access to, and funding to bring parks, which are a known community development tool, to fruition and help rebuild and better resource those communities. And we only had a little bit of time to talk about the second question, which was the incoming administration and any messages around parks and regionalism for them. But basically it was thought that we need a mayor who's going to be a cooperative and collaborative force to build relationships, not only with other local governments, but also with the state around infrastructure, which includes parks and trails, and that they need to have not only an eye on the issues of the city, but how they fit into the regional context. And that's it.
Very well said, Crystal. Thank you very much. Next, I'd love to hear from Rachel Marr to share a little bit about parks and active transportation. Rachel.
Yeah, hi. We also had a really robust conversation over in our breakout session. We talked a lot about a focus on long-term sustainability of funding. So, we're working on a lot of these big new parks and connections to parks, but we really need to think about long-term sustainability and funding to make sure that we can maintain these parks and connections far into the future. Another issue that we talked about, there are some neighborhoods that have parks, that have plenty of parks, even more than one, but are not being visited. And often there are two issues for that. One is that some of these parks are located in neighborhoods where people have larger houses or gardens, and so they're not visiting their smaller parks. But the bigger issue is, even if they wanted to visit those parks, a lot of those sidewalks are in disrepair or they don't exist at all, and it makes it nearly impossible to get there safely. So in addition to people just getting to and from parks from home, there's also lack of sidewalks to get to transit safely, and then to get from the MARTA station to the parks safely. So that is really where the connection is needed, and especially in the southern part of the city is where folks would like to see a lot of the focus going. We also talked about community engagement and education and neighborhood collaboration around what projects are happening and where discussions and focus has already been. Rebecca shared that the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition helps to organize the Community Advocates Network. And Rebecca, if you would drop a link to that in the chat would be great also. That's a peer-to-peer collaboration organization where folks can get together to talk about transit projects and objectives and learn how to build on each other's efforts. And in terms of what the next administration needs to know, we need to focus on ADA accessibility. There are plenty of issues with the city right now, and we talked a little bit about how the city actually has a lawsuit in terms of or pertaining to ADA accessibility, talking about connecting to the Beltline wherever possible, more funding for parks and rec and to maintain these connections. And then Rebecca also dropped in the link, she dropped a link in the chat about a mayoral forum coming up on October 25th. And that's being done with the Partnership for Southern Equity. And there are going to be questions there about mobility. And so if folks are interested, they should go and check that out. And also many of the mayoral candidates have transportation platforms. So going to candidates' websites, making sure that they have a transportation platform, and doing some research on each of the candidates before going to vote on November 2nd.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you to each of our facilitators for both leading these conversations as well as distilling what you heard into those brief reports. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Maria to lead us in we've got about 15 minutes of Q&A to wrap up this session. So turning it over to Maria.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. Wonderful, rich discussion, and we got some great questions as well. So here is one of the questions that came in, and it was directed to Doug. We've talked, we're now going to call it not a city in a region, but a city in a forest, but a region in the forest. Do you have any information about how important parks, green spaces, and the tree canopy are to people moving to Atlanta or into the metro region? Are these features that play a role in people picking Atlanta?
I don't have any quantitative data to suggest so. I do know anecdotally in conversations with friends from economic development agencies and chambers, and with some of our own experiences that we've talked to corporate leaders who've chosen to expand or move operations here, that they're always, that if they didn't spend time in Atlanta before making those decisions, as they were visiting, they were amazed by our tree canopy as a region. And so again, I don't have any quantitative data to back that up, but there's plenty of anecdotal data to suggest, if not a primary consideration, that's certainly an important secondary consideration as corporate leaders think about growing their operations or moving their operations to the region.
And a follow-up question on that. Being able to preserve our tree canopy while we're in a region that is developing and will be developing a lot more. We've seen how just in the city of Atlanta, the difficulty getting the city to adopt a more stringent tree ordinance. What about from a regional basis? What can we do to preserve our tree canopy and our old growth forest?
I think it goes to a matter of political will, and political will basically comes from communities that speak with persistence and not necessarily loudly, but consistently make their preferences known. I think when people start seeing tree canopy lost, then they appreciate it. You know, very often, having come from a public works background, as Bill Eisenhower knows, very often what people have that's going well, they don't appreciate until it stops going well. And I think our trees and our park space are the same thing. You know, for so long, particularly in our suburban communities, we thought we had enough of it, and you know, it wasn't a big deal to lose some trees here and lose some trees there. And I think we are now maturing in our suburban communities to the point where a lot of people are realizing, no, they won't be here forever if we don't make the effort to preserve them and to preserve our canopy and our wonderful green spaces. So I think part of that is time, but I think a big part of it also too is community will to express that to elected representatives or those who seek elected office.
This next question is for Lisa primarily. Atlanta Habitat has been, there's been a real focus on about park-oriented development and providing affordable housing and around transit. Can you talk about, is there a policy to provide affordable housing where smaller neighborhood parks already exist?
I think I don't know that there's an overall policy. I know that there are a few nonprofits that are focused on that. When we go into the community, we look at what are the community assets. And so, for example, when we selected our Browns Mill Village subdivision development, we have mapped out how to connect our subdivision within 1 to 2 miles to all of the green spaces in that community. And we've actually been actively trying to do fundraising so that we can connect trails and we can connect sidewalks. And then within our subdivision, we also have a neighborhood park green space area where people from the community and the people that live in the subdivision can enjoy that space. So the community doesn't have a lot of sidewalks, and that's back to the issue that Rebecca was raising. But I think there's a commitment of kind of the nonprofit developers and even some of the for-profit developers to add connectivity and green space. But I think it lends itself to maybe in the next administration having a comprehensive campaign or initiative around this would be helpful, because now people realize, I don't want to be in my house all day. I want to get out and walk, especially when things like COVID are around.
Yes, and Michael, can you talk about what happened yesterday at Atlanta City Council and how that can really maybe be a game changer in helping parks throughout the city?
Yes, I will share that Park Pride has been providing our grant program going back to 2005, helping to invest in community-led park improvements. We did make a change after the murder of George Floyd and looking at ways that we could waive the matching requirement and committing a certain amount of our dollars for no match grants in different communities, and then challenging our government partners to look at that as the floor rather than the ceiling. We have been trying to grow that concept and that idea to provide resources for under-resourced parks, particularly those in low-income neighborhoods. And something that was a real surge on that front was City Council passed legislation to create a community park fund of $2 million of support for coming through Park Pride for park improvements in those areas of community development impact areas that are eligible for community block grants. And that adds public dollars to already what we were doing on the private side of things. And we are hopeful that that will be a vote of confidence to help us to build upon that moving forward. I'll point out that Councilmember Matt Westmoreland was the champion of the legislation, but the vote was fully in support. And I believe we had 11 council members that signed on as sponsors for this. So the idea that those local neighborhood parks, particularly those in under-resourced communities, do not have political cover, I would say that both Councilmember Matt Westmoreland, but also all of City Council gave an emphatic endorsement for that effort and brought public dollars to the efforts that Park Pride has been doing on the private side of things. So I'm encouraged by that outcome. And I think that it bodes well for our efforts to build greater support for communities that need that support the most.
And Rebecca, I think we might have time for this question here. Can you make the link between affordability and alternative modes of transportation? And that's the term that I use. I know there are people who have, but when we talk about affordability, often we focus on housing and not on the transportation costs. Can you talk about the relationship? And so if we create the kind of transportation infrastructure that it would encourage transit use, walking, cycling, and all other modes of alternative transportation, what does that do for affordability?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's 100% essential because so many people are kind of pushed into these modes because of the affordability factor. And car ownership, it's so baked into our system right now. A lot of people really are struggling to afford housing and transportation costs. And while as an advocacy organization for transportation, we can't do anything directly about housing, if you can bring down the cost of transportation by just making it feasible for people to get out of really feeling pushed to drive everywhere. For example, if you can take a household that has a couple of adults working or one adult working and allow them to own fewer cars, that can really dramatically impact their annual budget, especially for a family living on a limited income or an older adult, just by making it possible for them to walk to a MARTA bus stop if they don't have a sidewalk. And a lot of Atlanta's communities that were redlined are the same communities that still lack sidewalks and MARTA accessibility. So I think thinking about these things more holistically and looking at it through the lens of one family's budget is the perfect way to do it, because then you can think about housing being one part of that, transportation being another part of it. And if you can bring one down, you give people more flexibility in another space. And then we're also looking at things like how can we make MARTA fares more flexible, more accessible for families, because a really significant percentage of people who ride transit throughout the region are living on very limited incomes. I know ARC is coming out with their ridership survey from the most recent data, but I remember seeing older numbers that about 40% of MARTA riders are making less than $40,000 a year as a family, as a household. So that's at the point where every additional MARTA bus fare really does make a difference. And certainly car ownership is pretty much an insurmountable barrier for a lot of folks in our region.
Well, the Trust for Public Land has urged that we have everyone in Atlanta and live within a 10-minute walk to a park. So the combination of parks, housing affordability, sidewalks, and ways to get around, they're all interconnected. And I want to thank Park Pride for coming together with this whole discussion and panel. We as a community, and this is not just the city of Atlanta, but throughout the region, we need to crack this and make it so that we all live in walking distance to a park, then that we all can afford to live in the communities where we want to live. So thank you all for participating. Michael, I'm going to shift it right back to you.
Excellent. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us for our conversation today. I do feel like we've opened up a number of different conversations, and this idea of getting affordable housing advocates involved in park conversation, getting parks folks involved in affordable housing conversations, looking at how you get to both affordable housing and parks, and this larger concept of the region. I think that this is, my head is just buzzing with all kinds of ideas that I do feel like at the end of the day, we are greater than the sum of our parts. And I thank you all for your efforts to look at a more livable city and region. Thank you, Maria, for herding cats in today's conversation. I think you did an excellent job. Thank you, Lisa Gordon, Doug Hooker, and Rebecca Serna for joining us for today's conversation. And hopefully many good things will be coming out of this. And also to each of our facilitators for their efforts. I've also been paying attention to everything that we've been seeing in the chat, and really appreciate the engagement of this larger community that we are all a part of. 24 hours from now, you will get an email from us that will include the recorded session that we have here today, as well as a feedback form. We would love to hear your thoughts. And I'll put a final push in there to make sure that get informed on the candidates and their positions this election season. Election day is 2 weeks from today. Please make sure to get out there and vote, and to spread the word on the importance of integrated solutions to complex integrated problems. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you spend some time outdoors at a park.